Catherine, I'm sorry. I've been diagnosed with cancer. I don't want to burden you, so let's get a divorce.
When Bob said this to me, I was dumbfounded. What ridiculous nonsense is he spouting? Still, in a way, it worked out perfectly for me. I had already been prepared for this moment long ago. Thank you for everything. And with those words, I decided to end our marriage and the life we had shared as husband and wife. My name is Catherine, and I'm a 30-year-old homemaker working a part-time job. I used to be a full-time office worker, but after getting married, I focused almost entirely on household chores aside from my part-time job. My husband, Bob, was a coworker during my office days. Bob has always been a bit of a dreamer, often speaking cheerfully about a bright future with an upbeat tone.
I'm going to keep climbing the ladder and eventually run an entire branch office myself.
My colleagues and I found his optimism endearing as we worked together. Bob's positivity was a breath of fresh air during those hectic times. And for someone like me, who tends to overthink, it was something I quietly admired. On the other hand, Bob told me he was drawn to my practical outlook on life. In discovering what we each lacked in ourselves, we were naturally drawn to each other. After a few years of dating, we eventually got married.
With you, Catherine, I know we can build a truly happy family.
We got married believing in Bob's words, confident we could create a happy home. But things didn't turn out that way. I'm not sure when the cracks began to show, but gradually they became impossible to ignore. Bob, didn't you say you'd take care of the laundry today?
Did I? I don't remember saying that.
When I asked, Bob would brush it off with an awkward laugh. Before we got married, Bob had promised me something.
I want you to stay home, Catherine, but that doesn't mean I expect you to handle all the chores. At least on weekends, I'll take over.
Hearing him say that back then made me genuinely happy. Originally, I had planned to continue working, but Bob pleaded with me to take care of the house so he could focus on his career. As a compromise, I agreed to become a homemaker working a part-time job. Even so, taking full responsibility for managing the household made me anxious since I wasn't particularly skilled at it. That's why his offer to help out on weekends felt like a huge relief.
As a couple, we've got to work together to build a happy life.
And for a while, Bob kept his word and took care of the chores on his days off. But over time, things started to change.
Sorry, I need to do some research tonight for work tomorrow. Would you mind taking care of dinner, just this once?
Really? Sure, I'll handle it today. Bit by bit, Bob began using small excuses to skip out on weekend chores. At first, I didn't realize that Bob was shirking his chores. I tried to convince myself that if he couldn't help out, it wasn't because he wanted to avoid it. But as it kept happening and the times he didn't do chores started increasing, things changed.
This week's been exhausting. Can I count on you to handle it today?
And finally, he outright abandoned his weekend chores. That's when I finally understood. Bob just didn't want to do them. Still, at first, I let it slide. I thought he really was busy with work and honestly wanted him to relax on his days off. But then I got a message from an old coworker who wanted to catch up, and I found out. Apparently, work had settled down, and Bob actually had plenty of free time. What's going on? After learning this, I confronted Bob, who had been using his supposed busy schedule as an excuse to avoid chores. I heard work hasn't been that hectic lately,
No, that's not it, Catherine.
he replied, forcing a slightly awkward smile.
Sure, the company's not busy, but I am.
What do you mean?
You remember what I said before. How I want to reach a level where I could manage a whole branch office. I've been studying for the qualifications to make that happen.
I wanted to ask exactly what his goals were and what he was studying, but I closed my mouth before speaking. I realized I'd been doubting Bob more and more lately. As if to reinforce my thoughts, Bob added,
I felt kind of embarrassed to talk about it, so I just said I was busy with work. But saying that probably makes it seem like I don't trust you.
Hearing that made me even more hesitant to ask further questions. I worried he might think I didn't trust him either. I decided to trust Bob for a little while longer and see how things played out. I loosened the purse strings for Bob when he mentioned wanting a reference book.
Thanks, Catherine. I'll give it my best shot.
Seeing Bob's carefree smile, I reflected on my actions. Maybe the reason I doubted Bob was that I had been relying on him too much because of my own insecurities about housework. I realized that my tendency to avoid things I wasn't good at might have caused Bob to feel frustrated. Determined to change that, I threw myself into improving my homemaking skills. I used online resources and the books I bought, and before I knew it, my dislike for housework had significantly diminished. Eventually, I started to enjoy finding ways to make housework more efficient. As I discovered new joy in my daily routine, Bob, in stark contrast, became more withdrawn and irritable at home. Apparently, he was struggling to keep up with both his studies and work.
What's this dinner tonight?
I thought you seemed down lately, so I tried to make a meal that balances nutrition and taste. Hoping to cheer Bob up, I prepared a colorful, lively meal to brighten his mood. However, it didn't seem to have any impact, not even on someone as hungry as Bob, who had just come home from work.
This is such a waste of money. Regular food would have been fine.
It didn't cost that much, and we had some extra income recently, so there's no issue. While I had splurged a little, it wasn't extravagant. Thanks to daily budgeting and, as I mentioned, some extra income. It was an expense that didn't put us in the red overall. Still, Bob sighed with a weary expression.
I don't know. I've lost my appetite tonight. I'm going for a walk.
Wait, what? Before I could respond, Bob walked out the door, still wearing his suit. He didn't come back until late at night. The meal I had left out for him, just in case, remained untouched. From that day on, Bob's attitude toward me noticeably changed. The kind words of appreciation for my housework that he used to say without hesitation. Now, he hardly ever expresses gratitude. On the contrary, he started grumbling about little things. Hi, you must be tired.
Tired? Must be nice. All you do is stay home and take care of the house. You don't know anything about the struggles at work.
That's not fair. You're the one who asked me to be a homemaker, Bob, and I'm working part-time too. Since we both agreed on me becoming a homemaker working a part-time job, I didn't want to argue about it. But when he complained about things that came from fulfilling his request, I didn't know how to respond. Even when I hesitated and expressed my confusion, Bob looked dissatisfied.
I believed you could handle everything perfectly, Catherine. But you can't even show consideration for your husband? You should just keep quiet and apologize.
Following such unreasonable remarks without protest didn't feel like being a wife at all. Is all Bob wants a convenient robot? I swallowed those words quietly. I told myself that Bob was acting this way because he was going through a tough time. If we got through this, I believed he'd return to being his cheerful self. So I kept my frustrations to myself and worked hard to make his life at home as easy as possible. Then came the news. A solo assignment?
Yeah, they said they really want me to go.
About 2 years into our marriage, Bob's boss asked him to temporarily transfer to another branch office that was short-staffed. Though Bob had been irritable lately, he seemed noticeably brighter while sharing this news. Oh, I see.
What's that reaction? Aren't you happy for me?
It's not that. But wouldn't living apart be hard? Wouldn't it be better if I went with you? Despite my mixed feelings, I suggested that I could accompany him. We were living in an apartment, so I figured moving with him wouldn't be much trouble. However, that wasn't what Bob wanted.
No, it's fine. I'll go by myself. Well, I just want to test my own capabilities. This might be my chance to prove I can handle managing a branch.
Bob's hurried explanation had a hint of his old self, which made me decide to hold back my concerns. With some hesitation, I agreed to let Bob go on the solo assignment. If anything comes up, just let me know. I'm always here to help, and moving to live with you at your new place wouldn't be a problem. When I saw Bob off, he scratched his head awkwardly.
Catherine, I'm sorry for the way I've been lashing out. Nothing's been going right, and I ended up taking advantage of your kindness.
Bob. Perhaps because of the shift in circumstances, Bob reflected on his past behavior and apologized. Seeing him like that filled me with emotion.
But from now on, it'll be different. I'm going to use this solo assignment to take a hard look at myself and become the kind of man worthy of you.
With those words of determination, Bob headed off to his new posting. For about a month, Bob and I stayed in close contact, frequently talking over the phone. It felt as if we'd gone back to our honeymoon phase. Maybe our relationship really could return to how it used to be. I began to rekindle the hope I had almost given up on. However, that hope quickly began to fade. About a month later, Bob's messages and calls gradually became less frequent.
I've been really busy with work. Please understand.
When I asked about the lack of communication, that was his only response. 2 months in, Bob's contact dwindled to almost nothing. By the 3rd month, he had started ignoring my messages altogether. Bob, if you're that busy, I can come over to help with the housework. If you need support, just let me know, and I'll be there right away. Worried about how overworked he seemed, I sent him this message. But when he actually replied, it was with cold, dismissive words.
Don't bother. Just stay where you are.
The hope I had clung to turned out to be nothing but a dream, and I came to realize that nothing had truly changed. From that point on, we stopped communicating altogether. After a year of living separate lives, one day I received a letter from Bob. When I opened it, curious about what it might be, I found divorce papers inside. Bob's section was already filled out. I knew I couldn't just ignore it, so I decided to call him for the first time in ages to ask what he really meant. Around 8 p.m., when I assumed he would have finished work and had some time to settle down, I made the call, and it connected with ease. It was hard to believe how difficult it had been to reach him just a year ago. With mixed emotions, I called out to Bob. "Hello, Bob. I got the divorce papers. What's going on?"
It's been a while since I've heard your voice, Catherine. It actually makes me happy.
He said, ignoring my question. His voice was unnaturally small and distant, so I turned off the TV, which had been left on, to make sure I didn't miss a word.
I'll miss hearing it once I can't anymore.
What do you mean? What happened? When I asked again, his weak and tired voice came through.
I'm not great at explaining things, so I'll just tell you as it is.
He took a small breath before continuing.
Catherine, I'm sorry. I've been diagnosed with cancer. I don't want to burden you, so let's get a divorce.
The moment I heard those words, a flurry of thoughts raced through my mind. So, that's how it is, of course. I almost let those words slip out, but stopped myself just in time.
Hey, are you listening?
Bob, who had been talking the entire time, might have gotten worried because I hadn't responded and had fallen silent. I forced a faint smile to ensure he wouldn't notice my hesitation. I had already made most of the preparations for this day. The situation was unexpected, but it wasn't unmanageable. With that in mind, there was no reason to hesitate anymore. I nodded to solidify my resolve and then told Bob, "Yeah, I'm listening. So that's that."
What?
He hadn't expected such a casual response to his revelation about having cancer. Stunned, Bob let out a confused exclamation, this time in a normal volume. To his bewilderment, I calmly said what needed to be said. "Thanks for everything. It's going to be tough, but take care of yourself."
Wait, Catherine. Hold on.
Ignoring his confusion, I hung up the phone and immediately took action. By that point, I had only a handful of personal items left in the house. The rest was stuff I didn't care about anymore, so he could dispose of it as he pleased. Within hours of Bob's call, I had left the house for good. I had no intention of ever getting involved with him again. Practically speaking, cutting ties that cleanly wouldn't be easy, but as a declaration of intent, it wasn't a bad start. My first destination was a budget hotel. Although I prepared for this, it was too late at night to take any serious action. Filing the divorce papers or contacting a realtor would have to wait until the next day. After spending the night at the hotel, I got up the next morning and sprang into action. There was too much to do to waste any time. Bob called me several times, but I ignored him and focused on my tasks. I filed the divorce papers without hesitation and started organizing my belongings in the apartment I would now call home. Next, I need to update both of our parents about the situation. After a few hectic days, it was 4 days after leaving the house that I finally felt ready to take Bob's call. "Hello?"
Finally. Catherine, what the heck is going on?
"What do you mean?" I had a good idea of what his reaction would be, but I asked anyway, wanting to savor it a bit. As expected, Bob hesitated for a moment before speaking again in the same strained tone as before.
I told you I have cancer, and this is how you act.
"What? But Bob, you said you didn't want to be a burden to me, right? So I just did what you wanted and gave you space. Did I get something wrong?"
No, I mean, it's not wrong, but I guess I just thought more.
He mumbled something incoherent, clearly struggling to put his thoughts into words. It didn't seem worth spending more time listening. I decided to ask directly. "So, what exactly do you want from me? Do you want me to come see you? If that's what you want, I'll head over right now."
No, that's not it. Catherine, do you want to divorce me?
"Want to?" "Bob, you're the one who sent the divorce papers. Isn't it you who wants the divorce?" Bob went silent for a moment, likely taken aback by my calm and straightforward tone, before timidly saying something ridiculous.
Well, weren't you going to try to stop me and say you didn't want the divorce?
Well, not really.
What?
When I responded casually, Bob was at a loss for words again. I made my position clear. There's no future for us together, is there? If that's the case, wouldn't it be more constructive for us to part ways and focus on our separate futures?
Wait, Catherine.
Well then, take care. With those words, I hung up. Almost immediately, Bob called back. To be honest, part of me wanted to ignore the calls to see how things would play out. But other than messing with him, it would be a waste of time. Having had my fun for now, I decided to answer the call again to move things forward.
That's so cruel, Catherine.
You sound lively. How are you feeling? When I asked, Bob fell silent, perhaps unsure how to respond. Honestly, if he's going to create a story, at least make it believable. Well, since the cancer is a lie, of course you're fine. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line.
What do you mean, a lie? I really do have cancer.
Then what kind of cancer is it? What stage is it? I couldn't help but feel exasperated. Clearly, he hadn't even thought that far into his story. As Bob stayed silent, I pressed further. Why does having cancer mean we need a divorce? Are you assuming you'll die? Do you want me to take care of you? Are you planning on getting treatment? If it's terminal cancer, what treatment options are you considering? Which hospital are you in right now? If you really have cancer, answer me. Bob couldn't answer a single one of my questions. If he were really sick, he should have been able to answer at least one, at the very least, the name of the hospital. The fact that he couldn't meant it was all a lie. Bob, you had a full health checkup before your solo assignment, and you were in perfect health. Suddenly saying you have cancer isn't very convincing. Trusting such an implausible claim would have been absurd. Thinking that Bob expected me to blindly believe him drained me in more ways than one. But I couldn't let myself get worn out. I needed to keep the conversation moving. Taking a deep breath, I said, "Well, let's assume you do have cancer. So why are you calling me back?"
I really do have cancer.
Sure. Let's go with that. Now continue. Bob sighed, clearly irritated by my dismissive tone. Still, perhaps realizing it was pointless to argue, he reluctantly continued.
Well, I thought, if you didn't want to be separated from me, you'd insist I get treatment.
And?
But since you don't make enough money to cover the treatment costs, I wanted to ask if I could cut off all your living expenses instead.
Honestly, it was exactly what I had expected. But hearing it directly from his mouth still left me speechless with disbelief. Bob, do you realize how ridiculous the things you're saying sound?
Well,
You say I don't earn enough, but then you want to cut off my living expenses? Are you saying you don't care what happens to me? In truth, Bob's argument was essentially saying my well-being didn't matter to him. And by the way, you make it sound like you're covering my living expenses, but aren't you just paying the rent for the apartment? Yes, Bob had been sending me money since his solo assignment, but it was almost entirely for the rent. Aside from that, he sent barely anything, and I was covering my actual living expenses with my own earnings. Now he wanted to cut even that, essentially telling me to live entirely on my income. In that case, wouldn't it be cheaper for me to move there and live with you? So why are you refusing?
It's because I don't want to burden you, Catherine.
Enough with the fake concern. Bob, you're cheating on me, aren't you? Considering I'd said take care earlier, he should have realized I was onto him if he had any awareness. But clearly, Bob hadn't figured it out. At my accusation, he let out a small, startled gasp. That explains everything. Not just why you don't want me to visit, but also why you sent the divorce papers and why you're making these ridiculous demands. If Bob was cheating, everything made sense. He didn't want me visiting because his fake cancer story would fall apart, and he didn't want me running into the other woman. The divorce papers and unreasonable requests were meant to eventually push me into agreeing to a divorce. In Bob's mind, he believed I still loved him. Bob thought I wouldn't agree to the divorce immediately and would try to hold on to the marriage by offering money specifically to cover his so-called treatment costs. He likely planned to take as much money as possible and use it to fund his relationship with the other woman. When the time was right, he intended to come back to me and claim that the illness couldn't be cured, using it as a reason to end things. Whether he was waiting for my financial or emotional breaking point, I couldn't say. Ultimately, Bob planned to have me file the divorce papers myself, achieving what he considered a smooth and amicable separation. This would clear the way for him to officially be with the other woman. So, in the end, you just wanted to use me until the very last moment, didn't you, Bob? The divorce papers were likely meant to make me panic and cling to the marriage rather than pushing for a divorce. But Bob's plan was sloppy from the start, and since I'd already given up on him long ago, it was all meaningless. You're pathetic, Bob.
What?
Maybe my tone of utter disgust hit a nerve because Bob shouted angrily. But at this point, having seen the depths of who he really was, I felt no fear. He was all talk and nothing more. If you wanted to be with your mistress, you should have just said so. Then you wouldn't have gone through all this unnecessary trouble.
What are you talking about, Catherine? I'm not cheating. And I have cancer, you know.
Even now, he refused to admit the truth. Instead, he clung to the lie about his illness as if it were a shield. Even if the cancer were real, he didn't seem to understand that it wouldn't serve as a free pass to excuse his cheating. It hit me once again that the Bob I had once loved and been drawn to was long gone. If that was the case, there was no reason to hold back anymore. With that reaffirmed in my mind, I delivered my final warning to Bob. Bob, stop embarrassing yourself any further. If you don't, things might get even worse for you.
What does that mean, worse? Hey, Catherine.
He seemed to have forgotten his own fabricated story, yelling loudly into the phone. But feeling I had fulfilled my minimal obligations, I ignored him and hung up. I truly hoped he wouldn't stoop any lower than he already had. But deep down, I suspected even that modest hope was asking too much. Sure enough, a few days later, Bob started calling me again. At first, I ignored him, but his persistence was relentless. Sighing, I finally picked up, only to hear his grating voice.
Why aren't you at the apartment?
Apparently, he had gone there intending to confront me directly. He must have thought that seeing me in person would somehow fix things. I didn't want to believe he was that short-sighted, but considering his tone, it was possible he might resort to physical intimidation. In hindsight, leaving the apartment immediately had been the right decision. Well, obviously, it's because I don't want anything to do with you anymore. That's why I'm living in an apartment you don't know about now.
What? An apartment? Where are you getting the money for that? You must be cheating. You're getting money from your lover, aren't you? Admit it.
Bob, apparently unable to believe what I said, hurled absurd accusations at me. No, I'm not. Just because you're cheating doesn't mean you get to drag me down to your level.
Then how can you afford to live in an apartment?
Do you remember a while back when I told you I had some extra income? Bob paused for a long moment before responding in a confused voice.
Did you say something like that?
Yeah, that's about what I expected. Back then, Bob was so wrapped up in himself that he had no capacity for concern or consideration for me. I didn't expect him to remember, but it still made me sigh. You don't remember, but I did mention it. Anyway, that extra income came from videos.
Videos. What do you mean, videos?
I started posting videos sharing tips on housework and cooking. When Bob began shirking housework, I documented my trial and error process and turned it into videos. By posting those videos, I hoped to reduce the number of people struggling like I had. However, life can be surprising. The videos received far more attention than I had expected, and before I knew it, the view counts were skyrocketing. Some videos even reached 7-digit views. My channel became monetized, allowing me to earn an income. On top of that, a publisher approached me, and I published a book that reorganized the content from my videos. The book sold quite well, and as a result of these combined successes, I can now live comfortably in my apartment without any financial worries. Well, I can live just fine without relying on you anymore. You didn't need me either, right?
You've got to be kidding me. So what? You're saying this is thanks to me? Then give me some of that money. No, give me the treatment costs.
Unbelievable. Are you seriously still saying things like that? Sure, it all started because of you, but you never helped me in any way, did you? If Bob had noticed my efforts back then and helped with housework, I might have understood his demands. But the fact was, Bob had done absolutely nothing. Judging by the frustrated groans he let out, he seemed to know it too. He couldn't even come up with a proper rebuttal, which only proved my point. Besides, I know the truth. Back then, you claimed you were studying for some certification, but you weren't doing anything, were you? The desk and shelves Bob had supposedly set up for studying didn't hold a single reference book. At the time, I chose to trust him and didn't question it, but now it's obvious. It was all lies, nothing but empty words. And I've heard your solo assignment was a lie too. It was basically a demotion because you kept messing up at work, wasn't it? Actually, I had known from the very beginning after hearing about it from a former coworker. Even so, I had deliberately chosen not to bring it up.
Why?
Judging from his muttered question, he was wondering why I hadn't said anything despite knowing. I answered calmly and gently. Because I wanted to believe we could start over. That you might go back to being the Bob I met all those years ago. Whether it was a solo assignment or a demotion, Bob's eyes had been bright with determination as he set off for his new post. I wanted to believe that his words of reflection and apology to me had been genuine. But that hope was quickly and thoroughly crushed. I might have been able to endure his cold attitude toward me. However, when he said to me not to come to his place, it raised a red flag, and the private investigator's damning report confirmed everything. That's when I fully understood. Bob had been nothing more than a shallow man who said whatever sounded good in the moment, even from the day we first met. As it turned out, he had been flattered by a younger female colleague at his branch office and had eagerly reciprocated with tailored compliments to match her. If it was just a casual fling, Then what was our marriage and the life we shared afterwards supposed to mean? With that thought in mind, I asked Bob, "Bob, what am I to you?"
You're, of course, the best wife ever. No question about it.
His panicked and overly eager response came as if our earlier conversation meant nothing. It only served to further expose the sheer emptiness of his words. Bob didn't even seem to realize how shallow he sounded. Taking a deep breath, I let it all out, hurling my anger across the phone line. "Give me a break. Go to hell." Hearing Bob's startled scream after my outburst was oddly satisfying as I hung up the phone. Well, that felt surprisingly good. There wasn't an ounce of emptiness or sadness in my act of revenge. Instead, I felt refreshed and even laughed at how good it felt. Oh well, that's that. I decided it was because I'd finally gotten everything off my chest. There was nothing I had done that I needed to feel ashamed of. With that, I fully moved on and methodically handled everything that needed to be done. Bob, having been completely rejected by me, apparently tried to run to his parents, tattling on me with lies and half-truths to win their sympathy. But it was all in vain, as I'd already explained the situation to them, complete with evidence of his affair. Instead, his sneaky behavior was exposed, and his parents scolded him thoroughly. This worked in my favor, as Bob ended up quietly accepting all my lawyer's demands, including a $50,000 alimony payment. Even with the division of assets, both our parents ensured that I wasn't put at any disadvantage. Incidentally, I later heard that when Bob learned I'd already filed the divorce papers long ago, he was left utterly dumbfounded, which I found amusing. So, what happened next? The woman Bob had an affair with, furious at being ordered to pay $20,000 in damages to me, publicly lashed out at him in front of everyone at their workplace. The resulting commotion brought most of the story into the open within the company. As a result, the two of them were met with cold stares from colleagues and faced severe treatment from their boss, leading them to quit the company in disgrace. I don't know what happened to them after that, nor do I care. I've maintained a good relationship with Bob's parents and occasionally exchanged seasonal gifts with them, but his name has never once come up during these interactions. I imagine they'd rather not talk about him. That said, both Bob and his ex-mistress continue to pay their damages to me in installments, so I know they're alive. As long as they keep paying and stay out of my life, that's all I need. As for me, I returned to my old job a while ago. While I'm still earning income from my video channel and book sales, I know those aren't reliable sources I can count on forever. I was a bit nervous about the gap in my career, but my coworkers have been kind and supportive, and I'm slowly getting back into the swing of things. My parents occasionally drop by to check if I'm struggling emotionally, but each time I reassure them with a big smile that there's no need to worry. My life with Bob ultimately ended in failure, but I don't see it as wasted time. There were so many lessons I wouldn't have learned without that marriage. For now, I'm steering clear of romance for a while, but I'm confident I won't be easily deceived again. I'll patiently wait for the day I meet someone who truly captures my heart once more.